Welcome to one of the most unsettling stories ever told from the Ozark Mountains. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see where and when these stories find their audience. The year was 1905. Deep in the Missouri hills stood Thornfield Manor, a grand timber estate hidden among the trees built from the vast fortune of Augustus Thornfield. Its steep roofs and tall spires loomed over the forest like judgmental eyes. When Augustus died, a violent storm swept through the mountains as if the land itself mourned him. But what followed his funeral would haunt the county for generations. County records say 23 people attended that funeral. 23 names were written in the mourner's book. Yet when questioned later, each person remembered the day differently. Who stood where, who spoke, even who was there. None could recall seeing Hazel Thornfield, Augustus's daughter, the one who that same night locked herself in the attic and never came out again for 37 years. The Thornfield family ruled over Shannon County. In 1902, they owned over 12,000 acres of timberland, stretching from the Current River to what's now the Mark Twain National Forest. Augustus had built his empire from nothing, arriving from Boston in 1868, with only a small inheritance and a restless ambition. By his death, his company employed 200 men and supplied lumber across 3 states. What makes this story especially strange isn't just Hazel's isolation, but how carefully everything about her life was recorded, hundreds of pages of letters, contracts, and newspaper clippings. And yet the truth behind her seclusion remains hidden. When her father died, Hazel was 32. By local standards, she was already considered a spinster, though old photographs show a tall, striking woman with sharp features and deep, serious eyes. She had studied in St. Louis and New York, unusual for a woman from the Ozarks, and when she came home in 1894, people said she wasn't the same. Dr. Samuel Woodward, the family physician, wrote that her episodes of melancholy had grown more frequent since her return from the East, though he never explained what that meant. Even Augustus's background was something of a mystery. He appeared in Missouri right after the Civil War, claiming ties to wealthy Boston bankers. He married Elizabeth Caldwell of St. Louis in 1872, and Hazel was born a year later. Elizabeth died giving birth, and Augustus never remarried. Those who dealt with him described a man obsessed with order and control, someone who measured every risk, every word, and every dollar. The local banker once wrote, "Thornfield speaks little of personal matters, but will talk for hours about timber yields. His only soft spot is his daughter." That devotion showed in Hazel's education. She was taught by governesses, then sent to Marin College for women, and later to a program in New York connected to Columbia University, an extraordinary opportunity for a young woman of her background. Letters she wrote home show a curious, intelligent mind. In one from 1893, she told her father, "The mechanisms of capital are not so different from your mills. Raw material shaped through pressure and precision." Augustus encouraged her, replying that what he built was only the foundation and that she would create the true Thornfield legacy. But something happened in New York that changed everything. Records show she abruptly withdrew from her studies in early 1894. There's a hotel bill from the Murray Hill Hotel suggesting she stayed 3 weeks longer than planned, and a telegram from her father saying, "Returning with Hazel. Prepare the East Wing. Discretion essential." When she came back that spring, her transformation was obvious. Mrs. Catherine Wilson, the minister's wife, wrote in her diary that Hazel's warmth was gone. "She greeted me politely, but distantly, as though we were strangers." When I asked about her studies, she said only that New York proved educational in unexpected ways. After that, Hazel rarely left the estate. She stopped attending social gatherings, sat apart in church, and only maintained regular contact with her father's lawyer, Jonathan Creed. Dr. Woodward was called to the house twice a year to treat her nervous conditions. Then, after her father's funeral in 1905, she vanished into the attic, and the Thornfield Manor began its long silence. Woodward's notes, though, carefully worded to protect patient privacy, suggest symptoms that today would be recognized as anxiety or depression. Sleeplessness, loss of appetite, and long stretches of nervous agitation. In a private letter to a colleague in St. Louis, he confided, "The case presents as one of severe emotional trauma origin, undisclosed. The patient refuses to discuss the cause and reacts poorly to any attempt at treatment beyond mild sedatives. The father is equally guarded." Augustus Thornfield's own health began to fail in the winter of 1904. What was first thought to be influenza turned to pneumonia, then heart failure. By the following spring, he was bedridden. During this time, Hazel stepped into both caregiver and business manager roles, handling household affairs and the lumber company with surprising skill. The housekeeper, Mrs. Whitley, noted in her daily logs that Miss Thornfield now oversaw every detail with precision, reviewing accounts after breakfast, dictating correspondence to the lumber office before lunch, sitting by her father's bedside through the afternoon, then working late at his desk under lamplight. Even Augustus's longtime business partner, Frederick Harmon, was taken aback. In a letter to a broker in St. Louis, dated April 1905, he wrote, "Miss Thornfield has shown an unexpected command of the enterprise. She challenges our projections, rethinks our pricing, and proposes reorganizations that suggest both boldness and insight. Most striking is her fluency with finance, bonds, futures markets. Her father says little, but he seems quietly satisfied." Augustus Thornfield died on June 12, 1905. His funeral, held 2 days later on the family grounds, drew neighbors, business associates, and local dignitaries. Reverend Wilson of the Episcopal Church delivered a sermon lauding Augustus as a man of vision who turned wilderness into wealth. Of Hazel, he mentioned only that she was the sole surviving heir. The morning after, the storm guests assembled in Thornfield Manor's library for the reading of the will. At precisely 10 o'clock, attorney Jonathan Creed arrived from Springfield, carrying the sealed document in a leather portfolio. In his later recollection, written in 1927, Creed described the scene as charged with an unease unlike anything I'd known in my years of practice. Hazel sat near the window, pale and composed, smoothing her black morning dress again and again. At first, the will seemed routine bequests to relatives, gifts to long-serving staff, and a donation to the church. Then came the clause that would define everything to follow. Hazel was to inherit the entire estate house, business, and land, but only if she married within 1 year of her father's death. Should she remain unmarried, control of the lumber company would pass to a cousin in Boston, leaving Hazel only the manor and a modest stipend. Witnesses differed on what happened next. The housekeeper, Mrs. Whitley, later told the Eminence Courier that Hazel rose so suddenly her chair toppled backward, her face drained of color like one of those marble figures in the garden. Harmon, on the other hand, recalled that she laughed a sharp, eerie sound that chilled everyone in the room. All accounts agree on what followed. Without a word, Hazel left the library. Those present heard her ascend the grand staircase, cross the upper hall, and close the attic door behind her. When she failed to come down for lunch, Mrs. Whitley went to check on her and found the door locked from within. "Miss Thornfield, are you quite well?" she called. Hazel's voice, calm and steady, replied, "I am perfectly well, Mrs. Whitley. I require nothing but privacy. Please inform Mr. Creed that I accept my father's terms and will consider suitable arrangements in due time." By nightfall, worry had set in. Dr. Woodward was summoned, but Hazel refused to speak face to face. She said she would communicate only in writing and would accept meals left at her door 3 times daily. A note slid under the door requested her belongings be packed in a trunk and left outside by evening. And so began what local newspapers would later call the Vigil of the Thornfield Heiress. Days turned into weeks. Servants heard movement in the attic, soft pacing at night, furniture scraping across the floor. Each morning and evening, they found her meal trays, returned the food barely touched, often accompanied by neatly written notes giving instructions on household or business matters. Hazel continued to manage the estate through these written directives, signing contracts and authorizing payments without ever being seen. Outside the manor, rumors flourished. Some said grief had driven her mad. Others whispered of hereditary illness, recalling that Augustus's mother had spent her final years bedridden with nervous exhaustion. But most speculation focused on the will. Why would a man so devoted to his daughter force such a cruel condition upon her? Harmon, in a letter to his sister, that September captured the growing unease. The situation at Thornfield grows more peculiar each day. Miss T conducts business with sharp intellect and unerring logic, yet remains unseen, sealed away like a ghost in her own house. One can't help but wonder what Hazel knew or experienced that made her father include such strange conditions in his will. There were rumors, of course, whispers about her time in New York, though nothing was ever proven. Even Frederick Harmon, who mentioned them in his letters, never dared to elaborate. The attic of Thornfield Manor had never been meant for living. It stretched across the top of the central house, about 30 by 40 feet, with 4 dormer windows and a high-peaked ceiling. It had served as storage for old trunks, unused furniture, and boxes of company ledgers. Thankfully for Hazel, it also contained a small water closet added during the 1897 renovation, a small luxury that would make her long isolation possible. How she turned that dusty space into a livable apartment remains a mystery. Records from local merchants show orders placed by Mrs. Whitley in the months after the will reading. Carpets drapes a cast-iron stove, bookshelves, and a writing desk, all authorized with Hazel's signature. A carpenter from Van Buren was hired to make alterations, though he was led upstairs blindfolded and only allowed to work when Hazel was hidden behind a screen. As the 1-year deadline for marriage approached, potential suitors began appearing at Thornfield Manor. Young men from Missouri's wealthiest families, business partners, eager to merge fortunes, even a distant cousin from Philadelphia, all were turned away. Each received a brief, polite letter of refusal slid under the attic door by Mrs. Whitley. The most persistent was James Holloway, son of a St. Louis banker, and one of Hazel's old acquaintances from her college days. In April 1906, 2 months before the deadline, he arrived at the manor and refused to leave without seeing her. For 3 days, he camped on the veranda, sending notes to the attic that went unanswered. On the 4th day, he received her reply. Mr. Holloway, your persistence does you credit, but cannot alter my decision. What you propose, a marriage of convenience to secure my inheritance while preserving my independence, might seem reasonable to a rational mind. But my father's terms were designed precisely to compel such a compromise, placing me again under another's authority. This I cannot accept. Please return to St. Louis with my best wishes for your future endeavors. H. Thornfield. Holloway left the next morning. Years later, in a memoir preserved by the Missouri Historical Society, he wrote, "I never understood her refusal. I admired her intellect and independence and sought no control over her life or fortune. It was only years later, when I heard whispers of her final months in New York, that I began to understand her distrust. By then, it was far too late. When the deadline expired, the estate's business holdings passed to Hazel's cousin Edgar Thornfield, as the will required. But what he found was chaos. The company books showed missing funds, canceled contracts, and unexplained resignations. Within 3 months, Edgar sold his stake at a loss and returned to Boston, reportedly declaring that the Ozarks can keep their cursed trees and their cursed family. Yet his brief stay uncovered something more. In a letter to his wife discovered decades later, he wrote, "I confronted Creed about the ruin of the company. He admitted that Hazel had begun dismantling it months before Augustus's death, liquidating assets and investing the proceeds elsewhere. The old man must have known yet allowed it." Creed said only that Miss Thornfield learned certain lessons in New York that her father failed to protect her from. This is merely the application of those lessons. When I pressed him, he refused to explain further. Meanwhile, Hazel remained locked away in the attic. The modest allowance from the will was enough to maintain the manor and a skeleton staff. Years slipped by. Mrs. Whitley continued to leave meals and collect written instructions. Packages arrived from St. Louis and New York, books mostly, and sometimes sheet music, though no one ever heard a piano play. In 1908, Dr. Woodward made his last visit, pleading through the door that her isolation would destroy her health. After a long pause, Hazel replied, "There is nothing wrong with my mind, doctor, and my body serves its purpose adequately. Please do not concern yourself further." When he warned he might have to involve authorities, she slid a short note under the door. "I am a free woman of sound mind, choosing to live as I wish on my own property. Any attempt to remove me will be met with legal consequences you cannot afford." Woodward never returned. By 1910, Hazel's confinement had become legend. Local children dared each other to approach the manor and look up at the attic windows. Some swore they saw a pale figure watching from behind the curtains. Others claimed to hear faint music drifting down from the eaves at night. None of it was ever confirmed. The most reliable account from this time came from Mrs. Whitley's private diary, discovered after her death in 1926. Her entries were methodical and sparse. Left breakfast tray returned 10:30. Tea untouched. Toast and eggs consumed. No correspondence today. But now and then her words hinted at something deeper, something watching, waiting, and utterly alone. Mrs. Whitley's diary paints an increasingly eerie picture of life inside Thornfield Manor as the years dragged on. One entry notes that she received no response, but heard what sounded like crying from behind the door late into the evening. Another, dated December 25, 1915, records that she left the usual Christmas dinner tray, this time with an extra slice of plum pudding, and returned to find a small wrapped package bearing her name. Inside was a cameo brooch that had once belonged to the elder Mrs. Thornfield. No note accompanied it. 2 years later, on June 4, 1917, she described unusual sounds from the attic, like furniture being dragged for hours, followed by the shattering of glass. When she asked if help was needed, a note appeared under the door. All is well. Some rearrangement was necessary. On November 11, 1918, when news of the armistice reached the Ozarks, Hazel's reply was brief and cryptic. "Only wars end. Other conflicts endure." While the world beyond Thornfield Manor changed forever, life in its shadow seemed frozen in time. Hazel continued paying her taxes without fail. Census takers listed her as the property's owner, though none ever met her face to face. As the years passed, staff members trickled away, the groundskeeper in 1918, the cook in 1921, until only Mrs. Whitley remained to tend the decaying house. A courthouse fire in 1923 destroyed many local records, including files related to the Thornfield family, deepening the mystery of their origins. What survived were fragments, scattered letters, business ledgers, and the recollections of locals who glimpsed pieces of the legend. One of these was Thomas Winslow, who worked as a delivery boy in Eminence from 1920 to 1925. In a 1967 interview with the Shannon County Historical Society, he recalled, Mrs. Whitley always met me at the service door, never the main entrance. Everything was precise, specific brands of tea-fancy stationery, odd imported goods. Once a month, I'd haul up heavy packages from Chicago or New York, probably books. I asked her about Miss Thornfield once, just being polite, and she said, Miss Thornfield values her privacy, young man. But I'll never forget one day, summer of 24, I looked up and saw a woman at the attic window. Thin face hair pulled tight, holding a big book or ledger. When she saw me, she stepped back. Next time I mentioned it, Mrs. Whitley said I had an active imagination, but she looked worried. Another account came from Eliza Johnson, a young maid who worked briefly at the manor in 1920. Her granddaughter later recorded her memories in a 1978 family history. That house wasn't haunted exactly, she said. Just wrong somehow, like it was alive, but tired. Everything was faded, the carpets, the drapes, even the air. Mrs. Whitley kept it clean, but it still felt heavy, like time didn't move right. You could always tell she was up there listening. The floorboards creaked above your head when you walked the halls. Once I was humming while I polished the banister, and I swear I heard humming behind the attic door, the same tune just a few seconds behind. I quit the next morning. Mrs. Eleanor Whitley's death in November 1926 marked the beginning of the final chapter. She passed away in her sleep at 78, having served the Thornfields for more than 40 years. Her obituary in the Eminence Courier noted her devotion to the family, though no one from the manor attended the funeral. Church records revealed a curious detail. A generous donation had been sent for the funeral and a maintenance fund for her grave delivered by messenger and unsigned. The handwriting, however, matched that of Hazel Thornfield. 3 days after the funeral, attorney Jonathan Creed received a letter bearing the Thornfield seal. Mr. Creed. Creed, I am aware of Mrs. Whitley's passing. Please arrange for all deliveries to be left at the service entrance on Monday mornings. Payment will be left in the usual locked box. No replacement staff is required. The house and I will manage as we always have. H. Thornfield. Troubled by the message, Creed, then an old man himself, decided to visit Thornfield Manor in person. His clerk later wrote that he returned visibly shaken and refused to discuss what he had seen. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again, Creed reportedly said. Let us hope this one remains locked. After that, the estate began to crumble. The gardens grew wild ivy, strangled the stone walls. Shutters sagged and the once grand fountain filled with debris. Only the bare minimum of repairs were approved by Hazel through her rare letters, fixing a roof leak, replacing a broken pane, nothing more. A 1928 tax survey described the property as a once grand estate in advanced decay, main house, structurally sound, but was weathered grounds, neglected outbuildings, collapsed. The photographs that survive from that assessment show a haunting scene: Thornfield Manor half swallowed by the forest, its windows dark except for one faint light glowing from the attic, a reminder that someone somehow was still there. The Great Depression devastated the Ozarks. Timber prices collapsed, farms failed, and families fled west in search of work. But through it all, Thornfield Manor remained fixed on its lonely hill, untouched yet steadily decaying. Neighbors moved away, fields grew wild, and what had once been the pride of Shannon County became a hushed landmark, its windows dark except for one faint light burning in the attic. Delivery drivers still came weekly, leaving packages at the service entrance as always. Payment was waiting in the lockbox, exact change in crisp new bills that seemed strangely out of step with the worn currency circulating in town. The most detailed glimpse into this period came from the son of Dr. Samuel Woodward, who took over his father's medical practice after the elder Woodward's death in 1929. In the spring of 1932, he received a peculiar letter written on Thornfield stationery. Dr. Woodward, I find myself in need of medical consultation. I understand you have assumed your father's practice. While I cannot permit a physical examination, I would appreciate your professional opinion on certain symptoms. Please bring reference materials pertaining to cardiac abnormalities and arrive at precisely 300 p.m. on Thursday next. Instructions will be provided upon arrival. H. Thornfield. When the younger Dr. Woodward arrived, he found the estate in ruined paint-peeling gardens, overrun. A note pinned to the front door instructed him to proceed to the second-floor landing and address the attic door directly. I called out, he recalled years later. After a pause, a woman's voice answered, refined, articulate, but raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. She described symptoms of angina, sharp pain in the chest, difficulty breathing, discomfort radiating down her left arm. When he asked to examine her, she refused. Instead, she questioned him about diagnosis and treatment in exacting medical detail, her vocabulary and understanding of anatomy startling for someone without training. The consultation lasted nearly an hour. When he finally asked how long she'd suffered these attacks, there was silence, then the soft reply. Since 1905. Since the day of the will reading. He heard footsteps retreat, and moments later an envelope slid under the door, containing $30, an extraordinary fee for the time. He never heard from her again. Medical historians have since speculated that Hazel suffered from chronic anxiety, panic disorder, or psychosomatic illness brought on by trauma and prolonged isolation. Her heart trouble may have been both literal and symbolic, the physical echo of a psychological wound that never healed. 5 years later, new evidence surfaced after the death of attorney Jonathan Creed. When his files were turned over to his successor, Morris Fleming, they revealed decades of correspondence between Hazel and financial institutions across the country. The records showed that in 1906, shortly after losing control of the family lumber business, Hazel had instructed Creed to liquidate her remaining assets and reinvest them in stocks, bonds, and urban real estate. Her written orders demonstrated an astonishing grasp of economics. She withdrew completely from the stock market in early 1929, months before the crash, and began buying undervalued properties in St. Louis and Kansas City during the depths of the Depression. By 1937, while the rest of the nation suffered, Hazel's fortune had multiplied several times over. Fleming wrote to her, requesting confirmation of his new role. Her reply, preserved in the firm's archives, was terse and exact. Mr. Fleming, your credentials are acceptable. Continue to execute my instructions as Mr. Creed did. Do not attempt to visit Thornfield Manor without invitation. The world beyond these walls holds no interest for me, but I remain attentive to my financial affairs. Enclosed are instructions for transactions to be completed before month's end. H. Thornfield. Among those instructions were the purchase of war bonds and investments in manufacturing companies that would later supply the coming war effort. Fleming's private notes reveal his unease. Miss Thornfield's insight borders on the supernatural, he wrote. She anticipates shifts in the market with unerring accuracy. Isolated as she is, she sees trends more clearly than those living within them. Yet I cannot help but feel that this precision has cost her something human. Creed's file warns not to inquire about her time in New York. I understand why. When World War II arrived, life in the Ozarks changed. Young men left to fight. Women took factory jobs. Rationing tightened every household's belt. But Thornfield Manor remained the same, its deliveries less frequent, its light still burning faintly above the trees. County records show electricity was installed in 1934, but locals noticed that only a single bulb in the attic window was ever lit. In 1942, a powerful storm tore through Shannon County, damaging part of the manor's roof. A repair crew was dispatched from Eminence, the first outsiders allowed near the house in years. Written instructions awaited them at the gate work hours, strictly between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. No entry to the attic under any circumstances, payment in cash upon completion. The foreman, Joseph Miller, later told the Eminence Courier, "You could feel her watching. Not just curious judging. I've worked 30 years and I've never felt eyes on me like that." Privately, Miller added another detail. "While fixing the east gable, I saw through the dormer window. The attic wasn't dusty or abandoned. It looked lived in like a study. Bookshelves lined one wall, a large desk covered in papers, maps hanging everywhere marked with colored pins. Before I could see more, someone drew the curtain shut. Even as the nation celebrated victory and prosperity in the years after the war, Thornfield Manor seemed frozen in another time. Locals treated it with wary respect. Parents warned their children to keep away, and hunters gave its woods a wide berth. The woman in the attic had become a myth, an echo of an older, darker age. Then, in the spring of 1942, Attorney Fleming received one final letter. "Mr. Fleming, I find myself contemplating the end of certain arrangements. Please prepare the necessary documents to transfer ownership of Thornfield Manor and all associated properties to the Shannon County Historical Society. Upon my passing, liquidate my financial holdings and divide the proceeds as per enclosed instructions. I anticipate these provisions will be executed sooner rather than later. H. Thornfield." Disturbed by the letter's tone, Fleming broke protocol. He telephoned the manor. To his shock, the call was answered after 3 rings. Thornfield residents, a faint but steady voice said, "Miss Thornfield, this is Morris Fleming. I received your letter." Sir, Mr. Fleming," she interrupted. "You have overstepped. The telephone is for emergencies only as stated in our agreement." "Forgive me," he said, "but your letter suggested you might be unwell." After a long silence, she replied, "I have been unwell since 1905, Mr. Fleming. The difference is that now I am also dying. Please prepare the documents as requested and contact me only in writing." The line went dead. In his notes dated May 23, 1942, Fleming wrote, "Consulted Dr. Heiress regarding obligations to client in apparent decline. Legal position clear, Miss T. Competent, refuses care. Moral position uncertain. Have arranged increased deliveries. Offered medical supplies if needed. No reply." On June 17, 1942, 37 years and 1 day after the reading of her father's will, Hazel Thornfield was found dead in the attic of Thornfield Manor. The discovery of Hazel Thornfield's body came almost by accident. A delivery boy, noticing that several recent packages were still untouched at the service entrance, alerted the county sheriff. When deputies forced open the heavy doors of Thornfield Manor and climbed the narrow attic stairs, they found not the expected decay of an abandoned home, but a meticulously preserved world, frozen in time. The attic had been transformed into a private sanctuary, an elegant self-contained apartment, untouched by the decades of dust and ruin surrounding it. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with volumes on finance, medicine, philosophy, and law. A mahogany writing desk sat by the window, its papers arranged with near military precision. French doors, in addition not visible from outside, opened onto a small balcony that overlooked the Ozark hills. It was a breathtaking view few had known even existed. But what truly astonished the investigators was the room's other contents. Piled neatly in tall, orderly stacks were thousands of newspapers spanning from 1905 to 1942, each marked and annotated in Hazel's exacting hand. Margins were filled with notes and cross-references connecting world events, market trends, and obituaries. One officer later described the site as a library of the world, seen through a single woman's eyes, a scholar's mind trapped in isolation. Filing cabinets filled with correspondence, legal contracts, and research notes stood along the far wall. One cabinet contained nothing but maps, detailed charts of the Ozark city layouts of Chicago and New York, and world maps pierced with colored pins marking locations across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. No one could decipher what they meant. Hazel herself was found seated upright in a chair beside the window, a ledger open on her lap, as though she had been writing moments before her death. The coroner's report listed the cause as heart failure. She was 69 years old. The true revelation came not from her body, but from the leather-bound journal discovered inside the desk drawer. It began on June 16, 1905, the day after her father's will was read, and continued for nearly 4 decades, ending just 3 days before her death. The journal, now preserved at the Shannon County Historical Society, provides the only first-hand account of her remarkable life in isolation. The opening entry reads, "Father is buried. His will is read. And now I understand everything. The condition he imposed, marriage within a year, was never meant to preserve the family line. It was a test. He knew I would rather forfeit the estate than bind myself to a man who would claim both it and me. He knew I would choose the attic over the altar, and in that choice, he has given me freedom. I have already dismantled the business. By the time Cousin Edgar arrives, he will inherit nothing but empty ledgers. From this room I will build something greater than lumber and land a fortune born from intellect alone. The door is locked. The journey begins." From there, her writing charted the evolution of a brilliant and disciplined mind. Hazel documented her days in methodical detail, her morning exercises, her reading schedules, her correspondence with brokers and lawyers, her nightly analysis of market trends. She wrote with a detachment that bordered on scientific, recording her declining health and bouts of chest pain with the same precision she applied to stock data. Yet beneath the composure ran a steady current of purpose, even defiance. On the 10th anniversary of her seclusion, she reflected, 10 years since I ascended these stairs. 10 years watching the world from above rather than stumbling through it. Father understood what New York revealed, that I am unsuited for the world, as it demands I perform it. I cannot play the roles assigned to women, the grieving daughter, the dutiful heiress, the compliant wife. Each role requires submission I cannot abide. Here I answer only to myself. I am free to think, to build, to create. Others may see a prison. I see a laboratory of the mind. Hazel compared her situation to her father's old butterfly collection, delicate creatures preserved under glass for others to admire. That she wrote was the fate I escaped. I have built my own glass case, but of my own design. The difference is essential. Throughout the journal, her intellect never dulled. She conducted studies in mathematics, architecture, and economic theory. One 1919 entry reads, "Completed my analysis of post-war European markets. Free from distraction, I see patterns the so-called experts miss entirely. Distance reveals clarity. Isolation sharpens perception. But scattered through the pages were shadowy allusions to something that had driven her from the world, a violation or betrayal during her time in New York. On Christmas Day 1911, she wrote, 6 years since that winter in New York. The lessons remain. Trust misplaced, virtue rewarded with humiliation. A woman alone is seen as prey or pity. Father understood only after I showed him the evidence, and even then he sought to protect the name before the truth. He said some battles cannot be won. He was right. The only victory is to abandon the battlefield and build your own world where the rules are yours." She never specified what that evidence was, but one clue appeared decades later. In a 1938 entry, Hazel reacted to a newspaper obituary. The financial pages report the death of Harrison Caldwell, age 73. Respected banker, philanthropist, family man. Nothing said of the young women he ruined, the lives he erased. Father was wrong about one thing. Time does not bring justice. But it brings indifference, and that is almost as powerful. I feel nothing. Not anger, not triumph. Only the satisfaction of removing one variable from the equation. Later research confirmed that a man named Harrison Caldwell did serve on the board of the Metropolitan Trust Company during Hazel's years in New York and lived only a few blocks from the women's college where she studied. No definitive link was ever found, but local historians have long suspected that whatever occurred between them marked the beginning of her lifelong retreat. In her later entries, Hazel's tone grew more reflective, her focus turning inward as her health failed. An entry from 1940 captures her quiet resignation. The world outside my window changes faster than thought itself. Horses replaced by machines, voices carried on invisible waves, wars rise and fall. And still I remain an observer in a world that moves without me. Perhaps that was my destiny all along, to watch, to think, to endure unseen. When investigators closed the case file, they noted that Hazel Thornfield had not simply withdrawn from the world, she had recreated it in miniature within 4 walls on her own terms. Her death marked the end of a private empire that had outlasted the business her father built. And in the silent attic where she lived and died, the faint light in the window finally went dark. Yet, human nature, as Hazel once wrote, remains stubbornly consistent. The same ambitions, betrayals, and regrets repeat themselves, merely dressed in different clothes. I do not regret my withdrawal, her journal continues. I have lived more fully within these walls than many who wander freely through the world without purpose or clarity. I have built a fortune greater than father ever imagined, read more than most professors, and followed history's march through newspapers and correspondence. I have done it all without compromise, without submission, without pretending to be someone I am not. The price was high: no husband, no children, no friends in the ordinary sense. But what I purchased with that cost was priceless sovereignty over myself, complete and uncontested. Few women of my generation can claim as much. When word of Hazel Thornfield's death spread beyond Shannon County, it stirred fascination far from the Ozarks. Newspapers in St. Louis and Kansas City ran features about the woman who locked herself away. The Chicago Tribune even dispatched a reporter to eminence in 1943 to investigate the story, publishing a feature titled "The Woman Who Locked Herself Away." Yet as the war overseas intensified, public attention quickly drifted elsewhere, and Hazel's strange, brilliant life faded once again into obscurity. According to her will, Thornfield Manor and all its contents were transferred to the Shannon County Historical Society. The journal and selected personal effects were preserved, but the house, by then unstable and rotting, was deemed unsafe and demolished in 1947. Only the family cemetery remains, where Hazel was buried beside her father, under an unmarked stone at her own request. Her fortune astonished even those familiar with her shrewdness. Records kept by attorney Morris Fleming revealed that Hazel's estate, once liquidated, was valued at approximately $2.3 million, equivalent to more than $40 million today. In her final instructions, she directed that the majority of her wealth be divided among educational institutions earmarked to establish scholarships for young women of independent mind and circumstance. One small women's college in Massachusetts used her endowment to create a new department of economics, an uncommon field for women at the time. Her accompanying letter read, "Economic independence is the foundation of all other freedoms. May those who study here learn not only the mechanics of markets, but the worth of governing their own destinies." Despite her generosity, the mystery surrounding Hazel's life deepened. The true nature of what happened in New York, the event she and her father both hinted at, remains unknown. Whatever occurred there was consumed by time, and the courthouse fire of 1923 erased the last surviving records that might have explained it. All that endures is the story of a woman who, confronted with a world that demanded her obedience, created her own realm instead. By locking a single door, Hazel Thornfield turned confinement into control, exile into authorship. During the official inventory of her estate, county officials uncovered one final curiosity: a small safe hidden beneath the attic floorboards. The combination was found sealed inside her journal. When opened, the safe contained only a single object, a silver key that fit no lock in the house. Attached to it was a note written in Hazel's unmistakable hand. Not all doors should be opened. Some are better left locked forever. The purpose of the key was never determined. Some speculated it belonged to a safety deposit box in St. Louis or New York, perhaps holding the evidence Hazel once mentioned. Others believed it was symbolic, a final statement of the philosophy that had defined her life, that control over one's boundaries is the truest form of freedom. The key remains in the Shannon County Historical Society's collection, still unclaimed, its mystery intact. In 1968, courthouse workers renovating the old Shannon County building discovered an envelope hidden inside a wall cavity. Inside was a single sheet of paper, browned with age, bearing what appeared to be Hazel Thornfield's handwriting. To whoever finds this, I chose the attic. I would choose it again. Some prisons have walls of stone, others have walls of expectation. I built my own cell and held the only key. That is all the freedom anyone can truly hope for. H.T., 1905. The letter now rests beside her journal and the few surviving photographs of Thornfield Manor. Visitors occasionally come to see them, though fewer each year, as her story slips further into legend. In 1952, a graduate student from Washington University in St. Louis wrote his dissertation on Hazel's case, attempting to interpret her life through the lens of psychology. His conclusion was cautious but sympathetic, that Hazel Thornfield's isolation was not madness, but reason carried to its furthest edge. Miss Thornfield's reclusion, he wrote, appears less a disorder than a deliberate answer to the limited choices her world allowed. She withdrew not from life, but from the performance demanded of her sex and station. The paper drew little attention at the time, but endures in the university archives as a quiet acknowledgement that sanity can take many forms. Perhaps the most fitting closing words belong to Hazel herself. Her final journal entry, written 3 days before her death, reads, "The chest pain returned this morning, sharper than before. I think the end approaches. I am not afraid. What began as escape became purpose. What seemed retreat became advance. I have lived as I chose, answerable to no one. My choices, for better or worse, were entirely my own." Can you say as much? The key turns both ways. It locks the world out as surely as it locks me in. That difference has made all the difference. And yet, the legend lingers. Locals still whisper that on certain misty nights, a light can be seen moving among the trees where Thornfield Manor once stood. Hikers speak of a faint silhouette at dusk, a woman's figure against the ridge, her face turned toward the mountains. Whether ghost memory or simply the echo of a life lived on its own terms, no one can say. But in the quiet hills of the Ozarks, some doors remain locked, and some keys, it seems, are never truly lost.